I was always the daughter who followed the rules. The one who got good grades, said thank you, made curfews, and never talked back. Maybe that's why my father treated me more like property than a person, because I rarely gave him a reason not to. My name's Eliza. I'm 29 now. For most of my life, I tried to earn something from my father that I now realize was never available to me. Approval. Not affection, not pride, just simple acknowledgement that I was doing okay, that I was enough. My dad, Peter, is the kind of man who believes respect flows one way, upward, toward him. He's methodical, strict, and the quiet kind of intimidating. Never raised his hand. Never raised his voice either. He didn't have to. His silences were colder than any punishment. If he disagreed with something I said, he'd just leave the room. Or worse, he'd stay and not say a word. Just sit. There. Let the air grow thick with disapproval, until I cracked and apologized, even when I wasn't sure what I'd done. My mom, Cheryl, is softer. But she moves around my dad like someone who's learned how to minimize tremors. She fills in his silences with small talk. Makes excuses before anyone can ask questions. I used to think of her as peaceful. Now I see it was just practiced quiet. Still, I kept trying. I went to college on a partial scholarship, worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, and graduated with honors. I didn't expect a party. Just maybe a handshake, a well done. He nodded, said, "Now you can do something useful." That was it, so I focused on what I could control. That car, that was mine. I bought it with money from weekend tutoring and late-night shifts at a copy center. A silver 2014 Toyota Corolla, not flashy, but reliable. Paid in full. That car wasn't just transportation. It was my first real act of independence. No cosigner, no help, no one to say because I said so. The car became a symbol for me, of ownership, of movement, of having a life that was slowly becoming mine. When I got accepted into a 6-month public health fellowship in Amsterdam, I was over the moon. It was competitive, paid, and would open doors I didn't even know existed. I remember standing in the kitchen, nervous but excited, as I told my parents. My mom clapped and hugged me. My dad didn't even look up from his coffee. "When are you leaving?" he asked. Not congratulations. Not even a raised eyebrow. Still, I pushed forward. I told them I'd leave the car in the garage, that I'd freeze the insurance, that I'd be back in June, and I couldn't wait to drive up the coast afterward, just to feel free again. My mom nodded. My dad said, "We'll take care of it." And I believed him. I really did. I believed that if I did everything right, if I was respectful and careful and clear, then I could trust that I would be respected in return. But trust is funny like that. It doesn't disappear all at once. It frays. Looking back now, there were signs. Tiny comments about wasted space or how a car just sitting around isn't healthy. I remember my mom once asking if I'd thought about selling it, just while you're away. But I smiled and said, "No way. That car's my baby." And we left it at that. I packed for Amsterdam with hope in my chest, not just for the fellowship, but for the feeling that maybe, just maybe, when I came back, I'd finally be someone my dad couldn't ignore. I didn't know then that the 6 months away wouldn't be what changed me. It was coming home that would. When I first got back home, it didn't hit me right away. My flight had been delayed, my luggage was scuffed, and all I could think about was getting into my car, my space, and just driving. I'd imagined it so many times in the months I was away. The familiar turn of the key, the feel of the steering wheel in my hands, the quiet hum of being back in control of my own life. But the driveway was empty. I stood there for a minute, wondering if I had the dates wrong. Maybe Mom had moved it to the street, or the garage, or even taken it for a spin, though that was unlikely. She hadn't driven much since I was a kid. I wheeled my suitcase inside, still feeling hopeful, still tired enough not to think too hard about it. Mom was in the kitchen, dicing carrots like it was any other day. She smiled when she saw me, came over for a hug. "How was the flight?" she asked, like I'd just come back from the grocery store. "It was fine," I said. "Is the car at the shop or something?" Her smile faded, just slightly. "Oh, why don't you ask your dad?" That pause, that 1-second hesitation, should have told me everything. But I still didn't get it. I still thought there'd be a reasonable explanation. I still thought I was returning to a world where my things were safe, my boundaries intact. Dad was in the den, watching one of those old detective shows he loved. He didn't look up when I entered, just gestured toward the recliner. I didn't sit. "Hey," I said. "Where's my car?" He took a sip of his tea. "Sold it. Just like that. No build-up. No softening." I blinked. "You... what?" "Sold it," he repeated. "It was just sitting there. Figured someone else might get some use out of it." My heart did something weird. Not quite a jolt, more like a sinking sensation, like I'd missed a step on a staircase I thought was solid. "You sold my car?" He finally looked at me. "You weren't here. It's not good to let a car sit unused for that long." "It was paid off," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "I worked for that. I told you I was keeping it." He shrugged. "It's just a car. No apology. No offer to reimburse me. Just the offhanded dismissal of something I had poured myself into." "It wasn't yours to sell," I said. "It was in the garage. In our house," he said simply. "That makes it ours." There it was, the logic of entitlement dressed up as reason. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to get my breath back, even though I hadn't moved. "What did you do with the money?" His eyes didn't waver. "Got that record player I've been eyeing, one of the good ones. Found it through a guy in Vermont, shipped it straight here. Sounds amazing." I looked at him, trying to understand. If this was real, if this man, my father, truly didn't see how deeply he'd crossed a line. And then it hit me. He did see. He just didn't care. Because in his mind, I wasn't a full person. Not really. I was still a daughter in the old-fashioned sense. Someone who owed him deference. Someone whose things could be absorbed back into the house when convenient. My voice caught in my throat, but I didn't cry. I just stared at him, absorbing the full weight of what he had just taken. Not just the car, not just the money. He'd taken the assumption of mutual respect and thrown it away like trash. "You bought a record player," I said, almost to myself. He nodded. "It's vintage. Got a real walnut cabinet. Thing's beautiful. You should hear the clarity." I walked away, slowly. No yelling, no storming out. I just left the room, sat in mine for a long while, and stared at the wall. That's when something started to shift. This wasn't about the car. Not really. It was about who I was. And more importantly, who I wasn't in his eyes. I wasn't independent. I wasn't adult. I wasn't someone whose property meant anything. And once I understood that, something in me went very still. Not angry, not even sad, just resolved. Because if he thought my silence was weakness, he hadn't been paying attention all these years. I wasn't going to raise my voice, but I was going to take something back. I didn't leave right away. I could have packed my things, walked out, found a short-term rental, or stayed with a friend. But something kept me there, not out of fear, but observation. I needed to sit with it, understand the shape of the wound before I decided what came next. The first night back, I barely slept. Not because of noise or jet lag, but because my body felt out of place, like the walls of the house had shifted while I was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. Every hallway I walked down, every cupboard I opened, I felt it. Displacement. I was a guest in the same house where I'd once built science fair projects and studied for finals. A house that had held my birthday parties, my first heartbreak, my late-night silent tears. But now, it felt curated. Like everything had been rearranged just enough to remind me this place wasn't really mine. Not anymore. At breakfast, Dad read the paper and sipped his coffee like nothing had changed. My mom slid a plate of toast in front of me and asked if I'd seen the roses blooming in the backyard. I hadn't. I'd barely looked outside. Everything felt muted. I didn't mention the car. Neither did they. It was like they thought silence would smooth it over, as if ignoring the rupture would stitch it shut. But the truth was, it wasn't just about the car. It was about every moment I'd quietly swallowed over the years. Every time I let his opinions override my instincts. Every moment I dimmed myself to keep the peace. The car was just the most visible thing he'd taken, but it wasn't the first. And that's what hit the hardest. It was the realization that I had never truly been seen as independent in his eyes. I was just another responsibility he had shaped and managed, and discarded when it no longer fit his routine. That afternoon, I texted a friend from college, Ava, someone who knew my history, who had seen me try to make excuses for my dad too many times. He sold it, I wrote. The car. Just gone. She called immediately. No small talk. Please tell me you screamed at him, she said. I didn't. I told her I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't say much at all. There was a pause. Then, Eliza. That's worse. I knew what she meant, but it wasn't numbness. It was something else. Something clearer. Like standing outside in the cold until your skin stopped shivering, not because you were warm, but because you finally accepted the temperature for what it was. That night, I went into the garage, stared at the clean spot where the Corolla had sat. The oil stain still marked the floor like a shadow of what used to be mine. And I realized I wasn't mourning a car. I was mourning the final sliver of belief that my father would ever change. That he would ever respect me on his own. That he would ever wake up one day and see me, not as a daughter to control, but a person to respect. It was over. That hope was gone. And weirdly, letting go of it felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to plead or justify. I was going to think, and then I was going to act, in a way he wouldn't expect. He always said his records were his legacy, not his career, not his parenting, not even his name. No, his record collection, boxed alphabetically in plastic sleeves, some dating back to his teenage years. Jazz, blues, British rock, obscure imports, limited pressings, the kind of things he handled, with gloves and cataloged in a spreadsheet. Every once in a while, he'd open the cabinet like a museum curator, carefully sliding out an album and telling us, mostly himself, how rare it was, how this pressing's worth more than some people's cars. I used to roll my eyes. But now I paid attention, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was studying him. He had taken something of mine that represented freedom, independence, and effort, and replaced it with his own self-indulgence. So, I asked myself a quiet question. What would it feel like for him to have something deeply personal, carefully built over years, taken without his permission? But I wasn't looking for revenge. Not the loud kind. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done, not the noise of it. That's when I started reading. I learned a lot more about record collectors than I ever thought I'd need to. Forums, legal threads, estate planning articles. It turns out, unless a collection is specifically listed in a trust, will, or legal agreement, it's just property. And if it's purchased during a marriage, it can technically be considered marital property. That was my first quiet win. The second came when I opened a conversation with my mother. One night, she and I were washing dishes, and I asked, gently, if she knew how much his collection was worth. She looked at me, puzzled, then said, "I don't know. He keeps that to himself." I asked, "Did you know he used the money from my car to buy the record player?" She froze, dish in hand. "I didn't," she said after a beat. "I thought he used his bonus." "He didn't," I said. "He never asked. He never even told me. I found out in passing, like it didn't matter." She looked down at the sink, bubbles floating between us. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have asked, or told you." That was the first time I saw a crack in her silence. A moment where she seemed less like someone trying to avoid conflict, and more like someone quietly ashamed of enabling it. We talked for a long time that night. Not about revenge, but about patterns, about how often he made decisions for the house without including her, how she used to think it was love when he handled things, until she realized she'd become invisible in her own marriage. I didn't push her. I just showed her what I had found, the legal interpretation of marital property, the estimated value of some of the albums. I asked questions, not with bitterness, but with clarity. If it's shared property, does that mean you have a right to sell it? If something hurts both of us, is it still protecting him to keep quiet? Over the next few days, she didn't say much, but I saw her thinking, lingering in the hallway near his office, taking notes on the albums, asking me once, out of nowhere, "Do you still have your title papers from the car?" I did, and I showed her. That small gesture, her asking me for documentation, felt like the beginning of something I didn't expect. Alignment. It wasn't just about what he'd done to me anymore. It was about the years of quiet control she'd endured too. The next time he left for a weekend conference, something he did 3 or 4 times a year, we sat together and made a plan. Nothing shady. Nothing illegal. Just fair. She would draft a letter, signed by both of us, notifying him that the vinyl collection was being appraised for sale. She would do it as co-owner of the household assets, and she would mention, politely but clearly, that the use of my property to fund personal purchases had consequences. I told her, "If you're not ready, we don't have to do this." She looked at me, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "No, I am. It's time." I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt calm. Because the best kind of justice isn't about making someone hurt. It's about showing them you're not powerless anymore. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is reclaim what was always yours to begin with. We didn't stage a scene. We staged a dinner, a small family gathering, something my mom suggested we host before the holidays, just a few cousins and neighbors, nothing big. My dad liked playing host. He enjoyed having people see him as the composed patriarch, the man with stories and taste and expensive vinyl humming low in the background. So that's exactly what we gave him. The living room smelled like rosemary and garlic. My mom set the table with the good china. Dad wore his usual dark sweater, the one with the elbow patches, and queued up a jazz record like it was a performance. And in a way, it was. I waited until coffee was being poured. The conversation had turned to travel. Someone mentioned Italy. Someone else asked if Amsterdam had been everything I hoped. I smiled, nodded, and then casually, I said, "I'm actually working on a project now. My mom and I are listing the record collection for sale. We're already halfway through the inventory." The room quieted. Not all at once, but gradually, the way background noise dims when people start to notice something off. My dad looked up, smile frozen halfway to a sip. "I'm sorry," he said, blinking. "What?" I kept my tone even. The records. We're preparing them for auction. There's a serious buyer already interested in the Blue Note and Decca pressings. The air changed. He sat back slowly. Who said you could do that? Mom and I co-own the contents of this house, I replied gently. Legally, there's nothing stopping her from liquidating shared assets, especially ones acquired during the marriage. His jaw clenched. Those are mine. I didn't flinch. The car was mine. There it was. The pause. The exact length of silence where understanding lives. I bought those records, he said, low and firm. Piece by piece. I've had some of them longer than you've been alive. And I saved for that car through 2 jobs and 3 winters of walking home after night shifts, I replied. You sold it in one afternoon without asking. Said it was just sitting there. So, we're doing the same. He looked at my mother like she'd betrayed him, but she didn't look away. She deserves something back, she said. Quiet, but firm. His voice rose. Not a shout, but louder than it needed to be. This is petty. I smiled softly. No, it's equitable. He stood up, pacing now, anger building beneath his controlled posture. You don't understand what you're playing with. That collection is valuable. Some of those pressings are one of a kind. Then you understand exactly how I felt, I said. Except mine wasn't about money. It was about trust. Opened his mouth, and then closed it. The room had gone entirely silent. One of the cousins sipped their coffee. No one moved. He turned back to me, still trying to reframe the narrative. You're not doing this out of principle. You're doing it to punish me. No, I said. If this were punishment, I'd be doing it behind your back. I'm telling you now, in the open, the way you didn't with me. That was the moment his expression changed. Not to rage, but something closer to recognition, a reluctant understanding that I wasn't asking for an apology anymore. I was done waiting. For one. My mother reached for her glass, calm and composed, like someone who had finally taken her name off mute. He sat back down slowly. No more words. The conversation resumed, awkward at first, but eventually people picked up their cups, resumed small talk, and allowed the moment to pass, at least on the surface. But I knew it hadn't really passed. Something had shifted, and everyone at that table felt it. The man who never explained himself had just been reminded. Control is not the same as respect. He stopped talking to me after that. There was no dramatic blow-up, no parting speech. Just a quiet, deliberate distance, like he was waiting for me to fold. But I didn't, and strangely, his silence didn't sting the way I thought it would. It felt more like peace than punishment. I used part of the record sale to buy myself a better car. Not because I needed one, but because I wanted to remind myself what it felt like to choose something for me. Something earned, not taken. Something that reflected the version of myself I was finally learning to honor. The rest of the money? I gave it to my mom, not as a handout, but as a quiet thank you. She used it to start an account in her own name. I don't know what she plans to do with it, but she said it feels good, having something that's hers. A few months later, I moved into a small place across town. It's not fancy, but it's mine. I furnished it slowly, choosing things I liked, not things that would have made sense in my parents' house. Some days I still think about him. About how he might frame the story to others, how he probably sees me as ungrateful or impulsive. That's okay, because I no longer need him to see me clearly. I do that for myself now. The truth is, sometimes we spend years trying to earn someone's respect, only to realize they don't know how to give it. Not because of us, but because they never learned how. And once you stop chasing that approval, once you decide that self-respect matters more than being understood, something shifts. You stop asking. You start claiming. So I'll ask you, whoever's listening, have you ever had to teach your own parent what a boundary looks like? What finally made you stop asking for respect and start demanding it? Because maybe that moment, painful as it is, isn't the breaking point. Maybe it's the beginning.